Thank you very much, Dr. Banac. The floor is open for questions for you that would like to ask, and we will have some limited time, I think. I think about 10 minutes will be okay. That's it.
I have two short questions. First, how relevant is terminology that was used? In the first time when you mentioned in the right Kosovo to join Albania, you said to join the enlarged Albania. For the second time you spoke about the united Albania. To what extent was this wording relevant? Because in enlarged Albania, the term enlarged usually means something negative, more than the national or usual national territory. And the second question is this approach of the Communist Party toward those initiatives that didn't support the joining of Kosovo to Yugoslav state. I have some other information that a group of Kosovo Albanian partisans that met Tito somewhere in April 1945. I think 9 of them were all killed and executed. Do you have any information for this? This was a team, a group that wanted to convince Tito about the conference of Bojana.
Okay, terminology is of course terribly important, and whenever we talk about a territory that perhaps exists in our minds but does not exist on the map, you know, we are groping. We are groping because we don't know really what we are talking about. There are some people who think that the map of Europe, as it emerged, for example, in 1918, 1919, okay, 1921, is somehow the only relevant map, that it is referential. And of course, if you have that map in your head, then what Albania means is very clearly defined, as it were, forever. I don't think that we ought to think in that fashion, but when we follow the language of the various texts that I was using, we see this as a problem. I was simply registering that, not using my own terminology, which in any event I had not developed for the problem. As for the second issue, of course there were numerous discussions over this issue, not only connected with the Bujan conference, but generally over the status of Kosovo in 1944, 1945, with groups of individual Kosovar Albanians and Tito, with in meetings between the topmost leaders, and Hoxha himself and Tito. And we know that various arguments were used for the resolution of the border issue. That there were Yugoslav leaders who thought that it would be just to give Kosovo to Albania, but not practical. That was the position of Kardeli at one point. I would suggest that we answer that question by moving away from this area into another, and I think you will see what I'm driving at. Stalin was the ultimate pragmatist on these issues. And there is a marvelous little anecdote in the Dimitrov diary, in which a group of Bulgarians from the Eastern Thrace area, which is to say that portion of Bulgaria that Bulgaria lost after the First World War, access to the Aegean Sea, had briefly during the Second World War as an Axis ally, and lost again in the post-1945 period. So this group of Bulgarians from this area went to talk to Stalin about it. You know, this is not fair, we should have it. This is, you know, the Bulgarian area. And Stalin tells them the following. He says, you know, the war is over. And this is what has emerged out of the war. But there will be other wars. And when there is another war, we can settle this issue. So these borders, from the point of view of some sort of an ultimate solution, are not. They're simply pragmatic, temporary solutions that satisfy the creators. And Hoxha said to Tito, but look, you know, you're taking taking land away from Italy to northwest? Why are you taking Istria? You're trying to take Trieste, and you are depriving us of Kosovo. Yes, but the struggle over there is a mass struggle, and you have not massively participated in the partisan movement in Kosovo. So there is always an answer that justifies basically preconceived policy.
Yeah.
My question is related to the period after the fall of Rankovic. It happened, the restructuring of Yugoslavia, the new position of Kosovo that culminated with the Constitution of 1974. Could you please tell us what was the role of Western country, and particularly the United States of America, in this kind of restructuring and developing new position for Kosovo at that time? Thank you.
I must tell you that what I'm going to say is more the result of close secondary reading than of any primary research by myself or anybody else. In fact, this is something that would be extremely useful for research, specifically American foreign policy, but Russian as well. The Soviet Union did always have an influence in a section of the Yugoslav leadership. We can see from those documents that I have dealt with that although Rankovic was unquestionably loyal to Tito, the idea that he was subverting Tito, which was of course the charge against him in 1966, is really not true. He was simply singled out for a decline of a certain policy of centralism that he represented within the structure of Yugoslav power. He was also a sort of a candidate of continuity and perhaps of return to the bloc that the Soviet Union consistently pursued. The fundamental foreign policy issue of Yugoslavia after 1955, when it permitted reconciliation with the Soviet Union, when Khrushchev and Bulgaria came to Belgrade and the relations were once again restored, the fundamental policy of the Soviet Union was to draw Yugoslavia back into the socialist camp, into the Soviet camp. This was attempted very, very directly in 1956 in June during Tito's visit to Moscow. It's a very interesting conversation. Tito is trying to convince them, for example, that the socialist front is much broader than the Soviet camp, that there are others, for example, in India, who are socialists, but not of the type that they're talking about. And therefore it's stupid to restrict socialist orientation to the Soviet camp. And Voroshilov tells him, no, he said, we are brothers. India, that is cousin. Not the same thing. And this idea of drawing Yugoslavia back into the camp is something that is very much on the mind of the Soviet leaders, and it's also very much on the mind of the United States. Because American policy toward Yugoslavia after, let's say, 1950, is to keep Tito afloat, meaning that there isn't really any regime change in the country. And the deal is as following. You can have your dictatorship, you can have your ideology, you can have anything you want, but you don't have to be a servant of Moscow. And that is not valid just for Yugoslavia, it is an offer that the United States is giving to all the satellite leaders. And in fact, in some cases, it was played to the hilt with some very unsavory customers, Ceausescu,